a pretty strong one. Call to order the regular city council meeting for Monday, April 17th, 2023 at 5:30 PM. Please silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate to limit the interruptions. Moving on to item 1 on the agenda, and that's the roll call.
Burlingame.
Here.
Evans. Here. Janser.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Rajagula. Ross.
Here. Item 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance, and joining us today is Jake Swerple. Jake is a student athlete from Minot State University, a 2-year football player and a wrestler. He is the second in the history of the Minot State NCAA Division II era. He is the second wrestler from Minot State to claim All-American status, and Jake will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Swerple.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jake. And Jake has been working on a college university project where he was kind of job shadowing with me today, so we had quite the afternoon. So I appreciate it, Jake. Thanks for coming to the meeting tonight. Moving on to the mayor's got a proclamation to read. As they are walking in, I will, Mayor proclaims April 18th as Minot High Swim and Dive Team Day. Whereas the Minot High School boys swim and dive team has a tradition of excellence that includes winning multiple state championships and continued that tradition in 2023 by winning its 31st overall and 6th straight Class A championship in 2023 through a combination of determination, talent, and hard work. And whereas the team is led by coaches Jake Solper, Ken Disher, Peyton Huss, Barb McPeet, and Gerald Brown, and whereas the athletes who won individual state championships in 2023 include the 100 butterfly champions Ryan Hubbard, 100 breaststroke champion, who can pronounce that name? Peridone Rungin, the 400 freestyle relay team of Jackson Ranke, Ryan Hubbard, Logan Hill, and Alex King, and the 200 medley relay team of Carter Larson, Jackson Ranke, Ryan Hubbard, and Peridone Rungin. I'm sorry about that. And whereas team member Alex King was also named the North Dakota High School Coaches Association Powerade Senior Athlete of the Year. Now, therefore, do I, Tom Ross, Mayor of Minot, North Dakota, hereby congratulate all the coaches and members of the Magicians 2023 State Class A Championship team and recognize them for another season of excellence. The mayor proclaims April 18th as Minot High Swim and Dive Team Day, signed by Tom Ross and Michaela McWilliams. So congratulations, guys. That's a dynasty. Woo-woo. We'll have the council come out and you can take a picture.
It'd be a nice way to end the era. They're tall. There's a space. There's a window. Glad to see everybody so bleaching their hair. Thank you all. Yep, thank you. It's just about clearing. Yeah, right. Yeah, I used to be some instructor in like, it's like it's take back.
Good job, guys.
The last champions to get a proclamation in the city hall here. this city hall.
Do I give this back?
Is that the team one? Is this the?
That's
one
the
for
team
school?
one,
Okay,
yep, for the
thank you.
school, yep. And really, I will hit the rest of the mayor's report in the liaison reports at the end of the agenda. So let's move on to item number 4, which is the city manager's report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Just a couple of items. One I did want to highlight that included with the city manager report is a full report of the council retreat that we had last week, prepared by the facilitator. So there you have a written report reminding you of the work that you accomplished last week, and staff is appreciative for the time that you invested in that. And we look forward to building off of that here in the very near future. Additionally, just publicly, I want to ask for the public's patience as beginning today, we've begun our moving transition from this building to the new city hall downtown. So we will continue to maintain service, but ask for your patience as we transition through into the new building. And again, we look forward to welcoming the public very soon in the new facility, but we'll have a grand opening publicly on May 11th. And look for more information to come out via the city's website and social media pages with regards to more information on that. And also while you're there, you can find information about the spring cleanup coming May 8th through the 12th. So some information there, and our crews are getting ready for that as well. With that, the rest is outlined within the city manager report. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there's any by the council.
Any questions for the city manager? Steve?
Really a comment. I wanted to compliment you, Harold, on the effort you and your staff have put into the retreat meeting process. This is the second time now in, 2 years, 3 years, we've had the same company and the same consultants coming in to help us. And I think having that kind of continuity has been very helpful in the whole process of sitting down and talking and reflecting on things with senior staff. I think has been long overdue, and I'm glad to see it occurring on a regular basis now. The next step I see is us coming together, probably with the help of this consultant, and starting the process of developing a strategic plan for the city. I know various departments have plans of their own, but we don't have any overarching or unifying strategic plan, and I think that would be a very good thing to do. So I really appreciate all the effort that was put into this. Felt it was a very, very successful meeting, and look forward to more of them in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anything else? If not, we will move on to item number 5 on the agenda, and that's considered the report of the Planning Commission. We have 2 public hearings. The first one is a public hearing annexing and zoning map amendment for Ridgedale Second Edition. Now is the time if you wish to voice your support either for or against the annexation. Now is the time for you to step up and speak.
Hello, my name is Hannah Peterson. I am with Lowry Engineering. I'm here on behalf of the client. I don't really have anything to add on top of what your packet has, but if you do have any questions, I am here to answer them. So.
Any questions? Nothing? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments, either for or against? If not, what are the wishes of the council?
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
We have a motion and a second motion by Mark, second by Paul. Is there any discussion? Any? If not, please call the roll.
Chancer?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Burlingame?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Moving on to item 5.2, public hearing on the zoning map amendment, the Senex 4th edition. Now is the time if you wish to speak either for or against the zoning map addition. Now is your opportunity. If not, what are the wishes of the council?
Move that we close the public hearing and approve the item with recommendations of staff.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Lisa. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Burlingame,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Item 6, consent, the consent agenda, and on this, we have 17 items. Now is an opportunity, if anyone in the chambers wishes to have any of these items pulled, now is your time to speak up. If there is nothing, what are the wishes of the council?
I move approval on all items.
We have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Burlingame,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Moving on to item number 7, that is action items. 7.1, parking restrictions. What are the wishes of the council?
Mr. Mayor, I would move the item.
We have a motion by Mark to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Paul.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mark.
I would just note that this change is at the request of the property owner at that corner. This is the former downtown YMCA. And because of the change of nature of the kind of business that's going on in there, it's kind of become more of a retail type place. The change to some loading zone space and some shorter term parking, less than the 2 hours, is congruent with what they're doing in the building now. So,
Thank you, Mark. Any further discussion?
I've got some, Tom.
Go ahead, Scott.
I support this fully. I just want to kind of point out, and I think that is a best practice going forward. On our notes and on the agenda for this, it says downtown handicap parking. Handicap has not been a term that's been used in stuff like this for a really long time, and we should probably stay away from that. Century Code in North Dakota says accessible parking. It's just an old term, and it's not preferred. So moving forward, I would prefer not to see that within our business.
Okay, so noted. Any further discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Janser,
yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Burlingame,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Moving on to item 7.2, and that is the revision of Chapter 2, Article 5, Division 4, Human Relations Committee. What are the wishes of the council?
So I have an amendment, so I'm going to make a motion to approve the amended version. It's all in front of you. Derek is also going to bring it up. It was just a few changes that were made after consultation with some people. So the first changes are there.
Wait, should we have a motion first? Before we get into discussion?
Okay. Motion to approve as amended.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Carrie, second by Steve. Carrie, the floor is yours.
So from the version that was in the agenda to the one that the motion is for, it's just adding beliefs along with affiliation under political, physical appearance, prior arrest or conviction record, and instead of immigration, citizenship status. And then after input from Alderman Padragula on the second page, taking out the required frequency of the meeting to leave it at the discretion of the chair and vice chair of the committee. So, as my memo stated, this was a committee that was established in 1976 here and sort of has not been in existence at least for a decade, probably more. So it was important to revive it, and this is that attempt. So we will get this committee set up and populated with some good individuals and with the city manager and a member of the council, and hopefully come to us as the council with some recommendations of how we can be a better city that's safe and welcoming.
Any other discussion? Mark?
I have a couple of questions, I guess. I appreciate the amendments because I think that took care of a couple of things that I was going to ask about. But so it looks like the committee from within its members that are appointed elects the chairman.
That's correct.
And I'm wondering if.
And I didn't change that. That was how it was written in 1976.
Okay. I'm wondering if it would make sense to, in a lot of these cases, the mayor who's doing the appointing appoints the chair, and that's designated in the appointment. Just strikes me that maybe that would be well to do here. Something to think about anyway. The other question, if I may continue, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
I mean, the other question I have is, there's a number of things that it looks like this group is to be tasked with, the four areas. Is it anticipated that this committee has a budget?
No, there is no fiscal impact.
Okay.
I mean, certainly, as the committee gets formed and the chair and vice chair start, I think, setting the parameters and the charge of the committee, I would hope, and certainly if I'm the council member who is appointed to that committee, would encourage them to come to us with, a budget amendment if needed. But I can't expect, oftentimes these commissions, because they're advisory, do educational kinds of things. So if they're doing that, I would expect the city clerk's office could make copies and things like that. There's not going to be, at least for this first, round, travel or, any, the city manager and I really thought about sort of some of the things that they could be doing and didn't think it would have a budget attached to it. But if that changes, certainly, they can come to us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions or comments?
Oh, Lisa, go ahead. Let Lisa go first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa.
That's, yeah, okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Lisa.
So, point one, yes, I believe that a revision in the current ordinance needed to happen because I wasn't in agreement with the wording of the ordinance, so I'm glad that Alderwoman Evans brought that forward. But I was a little unclear as to what the purpose of this committee would be, and so I spent a little time looking to see what services the state would offer in this situation, and then was able to find information about Bismarck's Human Relations Committee and Fargo's Human Relations Committee. Their description of their committees are very similar, and very similar to what we see in front of us. This one is probably a little more descriptive. I have a few more generalities, but essentially they state that they're going to do the same thing. But in reality, they're doing very different things. And so that would be one of my questions. In Bismarck, it certainly was educational, informational, supportive. I don't believe that there is a Bismarck City Commissioner on their committee. If there is, it's one. I mean, it didn't look like it. It was a volunteer basis. And it didn't seem to even be limited to the number of people that could serve in that committee. Fargo's was vastly different. More looking for grievances against the city. I had looked at the minutes. It's quite interesting. They've met 4 times in 2023. They have not updated their minutes in 2023, so someone in Fargo needs to fix that. But I went back and looked at 2022 minutes, and for 4 meetings in a row, they simply were addressing an officer-involved shooting. And that's not the road that I want to go down to with this committee. I like the way that Bismarck was looking at it, but I don't think that it is our role, or that committee's role in particular, to look into something like that, because if there was that sort of incident, it would be investigated by another agency, the Attorney General's office, however it would be. I don't think that it's the role of a Human Relations Committee to look at that, but that seemed to be what they were spending 4 of their meetings talking about. So, long-winded question here, what would this committee really look at? What would the purpose be in their meeting? And maybe that's for Alderwoman Evans.
I'll defer to Carrie on that one.
I mean, so since we've reaffirmed our aspiration to be a safe and welcoming community, and that is one of the 4 aspirations of this governing body, I think it's important to have a committee that really takes a look at what we need to do as a community and a council to be, an affirming and welcoming city. And so I would, see that this commission, much like Bismarck's, they are promoting, fairness and acceptance and embracing of the diversities of our communities. They are coming to council if they're like, hey, we think this should, be changed or updated. Just really being able to focus on, how we become a more safe and welcoming city and what those are. I cannot, imagine with the 4 powers and duties that any kind of law enforcement, shooting would be part of the purview of that. And certainly with a city council member and the city manager being advisory members on this committee, I think, would direct them to remember what their powers and responsibilities are. So for now, I just see it as that, really, just, being that sort of a watchdog, but not for police shooting, but for, how we can do better as a community, and coming to us if there's policy recommendations or ordinance recommendations to make.
Okay, and if I can just ask one more question, that is something that Bismarck specifically does list let's see if I can find the wording. It does regard what information they would bring to the commission.
Well, so here we have to recommend.
Here it is. So recommend to the Board of City Commissioners action and programs within the authority of the city in furtherance of the purpose of the Bismarck Human Relations Committee as described in this chapter.
Yeah.
So I liked that additional phrase in there.
But we have that in ours. So
Did-
if you
okay.
look at B, to recommend to the city council action and programs in furtherance of the purpose of the Human Relations Committee as described in this division.
Okay.
So-
Yeah, so I'm comfortable with that. All right, thank you.
Anything else? Scott?
Yeah, just a couple of quick kind of clarification
You can keep that
questions.
up, Derek.
Carrie, if you don't mind, thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
Under one of the duties and powers, and this may be left over from the last time, so please inform me, is to assist aggravated individuals by offering information and guidance.
Yeah, that was from the 1976. So, I mean, certainly this is the precursor. I'm going to be very transparent and clear about my intentions. This is the precursor, I hope, to our city adopting an anti-discrimination ordinance. I think when I've looked back at when this committee was in its heyday, like in the 80s and stuff, what would happen is some aggrieved individuals would come, right, and there's no anti-discrimination law, so they had no, course of action with the city, and the committee would help them, like, why don't you contact the Attorney General, or just giving them information and resources, or in fact even educating, saying, no, there is no law that prohibits that, that kind of thing. So it didn't seem like it was a really big part of like the meetings, but there was some times where they played that role as, providing resources and guidance to people who may need them.
Thank you. If I can continue.
Yep, go ahead, Scott.
One of the things that, when I saw that, I thought back to just a little history of Scott here, is going back to like 2001 legislative session in North Dakota. One of my first times getting involved in legislative advocacy was advocating for North Dakota State Human Rights Coalition. Commission, it was at that time, I'm sorry. That didn't happen. However, that bill was hog-housed into what would eventually become the North Dakota Department of Labor and Division of Human Rights. And my job during that process was to collect information on people who had been discriminated against in North Dakota. And so the number of the company I worked at that time was published all over the state, and I dealt with those calls. And I dealt with a lot of people who had been aggrieved for a variety of reasons. And every time they called me and every time they talked to me, I listened to their story, and a lot of those stories were, it was quite obvious they'd experienced huge amounts of trauma. However, some of the trauma that they experienced were not related to human rights violations. They were related to, I had a bad spouse, or I had a bad attorney, or I had a bad family, and those aren't human rights violations. They're just, unfortunately, the way life is sometimes. So I think that that's important, and I appreciate what you said, Carrie, about providing information when it is appropriate, and also guidance, kind guidance, when it's not appropriate. I also think within that too is to educate the community on, what is the best ways to prevent these kind of things.
Exactly. Yep.
I've spent, again, a career working with youth with disabilities and talking about the importance of requesting modifications and accommodations at work so that you can become successful. Because what I don't like is having a 40-year-old come to me and say, I was fired because of my disability, and I asked them, did they know you had a disability? And they say no. And, well, you weren't fired if they didn't know you had a disability. You're fired for lack of performance, but you didn't request the modifications in order to actually protect yourself under human rights laws. So I think it's so important to really lead with that importance of education. And it's not as edgy and it's not going to be as exciting in the newspapers and stuff, but it's the right thing to do. So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you for putting this together.
Thank you, Scott. Anything else? Steve?
Yeah, to be honest, I was surprised that we even had an old Human Rights Commission. It obviously hasn't done anything in the time I've been around. But I think there have been some precursors or some similar kinds of organizations that have been active. One was a group called the Minot Commission on the Status of Women that shortly after we moved to Minot back in the early 1980s, my spouse had a position on, and they did a lot of good work in highlighting women's rights kinds of issues, family kinds of issues. In fact, one of the things they did was they put a little business card together that listed a woman's rights in the workplace, and I was so impressed by it that I used it as a routine part of my onboarding or hiring process of every female person who I ever hired. We talked about those kinds of issues and safeguards they had. Again, this is a very small business, but I felt that was very important. And I gave them a copy of this card, and I said, look, this is a clear statement of what I stand for and what, your rights are. So that in my office, in my professional practice, has played a significant role in educating people. The other group that we had once, and I don't know what the exact name of it was, but it was something like the Minot Commission or the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities or Handicaps or something like that. And I think it was trying to look at accessibility issues and mostly employment issues. Don't really remember what else it did, but there was an attempt to bring issues that people with disabilities might have to public attention and try to improve their life circumstances in terms of what the city could do. So this, I think, follows in the tradition of those two groups, and I personally think it's time to bring something like that back, particularly in terms of this being the second time that the City Council as a whole has readopted our aspiration statement, and one of those 4 aspirations is to become more welcoming and to everyone, and to ensure that we do have a safe community for everyone, no matter what their characteristics might be. So I think this is a step forward, but certainly isn't anything novel.
Thank you, Steve. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've sort of a basic question, and because I'm just not very familiar with these kinds of groups or structures. So what I see before us is that we're setting up a committee, but people have seemingly used commission and committee both in discussion tonight, and I guess I'd like to know is there a difference, or what is the difference?
It's committee, it's not commission. I mean, Alderwoman Olson used to talk about Bismarck City Commission, but this is committee. There's no commission in the language here. It's always been committee. It was formed as committee. With the rewrite, nothing's wrong with committee. I think let's just keep that. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Right. That was the only time you used the
Yes.
commission. Okay.
I might have used it.
Mr. Mayor, one final question then.
Go ahead.
Because I think there will be a great deal of interest for people to serve on this committee. How will that process go? I think, if I'm correct, we have an application on the website to apply for any committees. Am I saying that truthfully? If not, how would people who are interested in serving on this committee be able to address you and seek a
So
spot?
I would ask that we do the same thing we have just done with Alderman Burlingame's committee, where in consultation with others, he provided the mayor with potential members. So that's what I would like to see happen. But of course, this gives the mayor authority to appoint them. Yeah, that's just my thoughts.
I hate to really charge up your inbox, but should we have requests come to your email address? So we have it all together.
That's what we did.
But we didn't do that for Alderman Burlingame's committee, so why are we doing it for
But
this?
some of them, a majority of them came to
A
Kate.
majority
Okay.
of Alderman Burlingame's came from them emailing.
But see, we got them, it
Okay.
was all going, you know,
Oh.
some came to me, some came to Scott, but I think a majority came to Kayla.
Oh,
So
okay.
I think just to
Yep.
keep it all concise, we'll just have them go to you. Is that all right? Carrie?
Yeah, I'll do a write-up, like a little, like blurb that maybe Derek can put on the website, and then put your email in there, say, hey, if you're interested, do this. So I'll do that tonight, so Derek can get that on the website.
That'd be great.
And there is, city attorney pointed out, there is a volunteer form on the city website to apply to volunteer for a board or a committee. So why don't we, and those probably come directly to you.
I'm not sure if they do or not.
And the deer in the headlights reaction
I don't know
told
if I've
me-
ever seen.
I'll look
but
at it.
They
I'll
might
look
come.
If they don't, we can fix that and make sure it
Yes,
does.
we can. Yes, we can fix it.
Not to the city manager? Yeah,
Um,
okay.
Sorry,
Scott?
I just want to say in general, I like the idea, I really like the idea of casting a wide net when we're looking at these kind of things, and that's why it was hard because we ended up having a lot of, with the child care committee, a lot of parents, a lot of child care providers that applied. But that being said, it was nice to have a wide net and maybe get some people that aren't necessarily part of our inner circles. And I think that as somebody that kind of came up by volunteering for lots of commissions and committees and stuff, I appreciate that opportunity.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just one more clarification. I think we all understand this, but so that everyone in the room and online can understand it as well. This will be a standing committee. It's different than an ad hoc committee. There's no end to this, where an ad hoc committee would have an end. So just so that everyone understands that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, if there's nothing else, Kayla, please call the roll.
Evans,
Yes.
Chancer,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Rajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Burlingame.
Yes.
Motion carries. Moving on to item 8 on the agenda, and that's personal appearances. Now is the opportunity. If you have anything you wish to address with the city council, now is your time to step to the podium. If not, we will move on to item 9 on the agenda. That's miscellaneous and discussion items. Number 1, 9.1 is the capital improvement plan presentation by city engineer Lance Meyer. Lance, if you'd like to step forward, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This shouldn't take too long. I wanted to keep this presentation very high level, so it's just a summary of the overall plan. We're going to talk about a couple of requested sidewalk projects and then open it up for questions. And like we've done in the past, if you have thoughts or questions on the projects, please let us know, and then we'll bring this back on May 1st for final adoption, and then finance staff will start to use that to program budgets. Okay? So the process has not changed in the last several years. We have a pretty long flow chart there of how this all works. And we're essentially towards the end here where we're seeking input and some affirmation from council that we're on the right track with what we're bringing forward for projects. Overall, the final number that we've come up with is just under $439 million over the next 5 years, from 24 to 28. That's down about $100 million from the previous CIP, so trending in the right direction. We broke this down by department. You'll see the majority of the CIP is public works type projects, flood control, obviously, and then utility improvements. A lot of the transportation related improvements are going to be found in my department in engineering, and then the airport also has quite a few projects in store here too over the next several years. Breaking this down by year, the goal is to try to level load this so you keep your capital costs fairly consistent over the 5 years. But it's just so difficult to do right now with some of these large-scale flood control projects, and then the potential for some pretty large wastewater projects in 28. That's the treatment plant and a lift station upgrade. those are very dependent on regulatory approvals and growth needs. So probably what would happen is those projects would just keep continuing to be listed in the final year. If you take out the sanitary sewer improvements, then the last year in the CIP is trending very similar to some of the other years. We've had a couple of requests for some sidewalk projects to be added to the capital improvement plan. We do have 2 existing projects in there for our Safe Routes to Schools project that we've been doing the last several years. Edison, and a continuation of Edison next year. And then in '25, we do some more improvements around Washington Elementary. But first, let's talk about 21st Avenue. So if you remember from last fall, we had brought forward a project that's been requested for many, many years from constituents up in that area. They wanted some additional sidewalk improvements completed around 21st Avenue to have a link into the soccer complex, and they wanted a safer intersection to get people across 21st Avenue. I was instructed to meet with Park District and Minot Public Schools representatives, which I did here recently. And they took a look at it with me and concluded that this would be a really good project to help move forward together on. We didn't talk about specific dollar amounts for each person. I think at this step it was more of a, is this something you're interested in? And if so, then we can talk about it further. They were really interested in the first phase of the project, which was the improvements from 9th Street to 12th Street. And then the crossing into the soccer complex. As the project starts to get further towards the west, I don't want to say it becomes less important, but the nexus starts getting a little further away for those agencies. So the way that I've laid this out, and I broke it down into phases last fall, but the first phase, which is the more costly phase, could be designed in 2024 and then budgeted for construction in '25. So we stretched that timeline out a little bit just so the other agencies would have time to work through their budget approvals and those sort of things. If we wanted to do that project a little sooner, and if you wanted them to participate, that might be a little more difficult for them to do. We'd have to talk about timelines with them and see if that's something they're interested in. And then recently here, we had a request from a citizen to install sidewalks on 16th Avenue Southwest. So this would be from 16th Street to the east to 12th Street, and that's where next year's Edison Safe Routes to School project would stop. So essentially, this project would link that project with the one that's proposed. It's not cheap. We did a real crude back of the napkin type of cost estimate, and it's somewhere around $700,000. The concerns that I have with this project right now are, we're going to be constructing a sidewalk on a section of the road that's a rural section. So it doesn't have curb and gutters, it just has ditches. And that's kind of a holdover from this area back in the 60s and 70s before everything kind of developed and 16th Avenue connected to a county road back then. So if we move forward with a sidewalk project now, I can't guarantee that some of that sidewalk wouldn't have to be removed in order to lower the roadway and get everything to tie in. It's tough to design the sidewalk without having to design the road as well. So on this one, my suggestion would be to wait a little bit until we have more clarity on when we should reconstruct 16th Avenue. Road's in pretty good shape, so it might be a few years off, and that alone would be another fairly costly project. So I think maybe the question back to council is if this project moves forward, that's fine. We should probably look at some improvements to 16th Avenue, and then also maybe consider the fact that over the last several years, we've seen concrete prices go up substantially around Minot. I think as an industry, there's not as many contractors anymore that are doing concrete work, and so you're paying a premium as to the work. Maybe for the next several years, we should invest additional dollars into finishing off some of our Safe Routes to School projects, because I anticipate those projects are probably going to increase in price just because of the nature of the industry. I told you I'd keep it short. So that was the overview of the plan and a couple of the sidewalk projects that have been requested. So I stand for questions.
Any questions? Mark?
Lance, that out in 28, that wastewater treatment plant is I think it was 90 or something. Is that inevitable? I mean, do we know if is that kind of a fixed thing that's going to happen at that point in time, or at some point? What do we know about that?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Janser, there's two questions that would have to be answered to trigger a mechanical treatment plant. So there would have to be a regulatory limit set that we can no longer achieve with our existing system, which is aeration ponds and lagoon cells. Or we would reach a population threshold, or a industry would come to town that would generate enough wastewater flow that would overwhelm our existing infrastructure. So those are the trigger points. I think recently the DEQ approved our wastewater permit for another several years. So I think from our standpoint, we see this as a potential project that has to happen in the long term, but it's really growth dependent on the next 5 years.
Go ahead, Mark.
And then in that, as you see that future scenario, would the ponds in the current thing completely go away and be replaced by this new treatment plant, or would they kind of run concurrently for a while, perhaps?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Janser, in the facility study that we have on file when we looked at this back in 2014, the ponds would stay in service and help us meter out what we call a wet weather flow. So if you have a large rain event or something, you don't have to send all of that wastewater through the treatment plant to be treated. You can meter some of it through the lagoon cells and then the rest through the plant. So it helps us keep the plant size a little bit smaller.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lance, I had some individuals reach out to me about Sunset Boulevard. You want to give some history on that as to why it's dirt from where it is to where it is?
Certainly. So way back when I was growing up here, that was just kind of a prairie trail that connected 21st Avenue to 19th Avenue. It was used as a cut across. You wouldn't have to go around the bypass. Probably sometime in maybe the mid-90s, that roadway was gravelled. And really it was an attempt to try to get emergency vehicle traffic into the neighborhood south of 19th Avenue faster. So they wouldn't have to go on the bypass and then back into town. An easement was granted to the city of Minot for an access. But at that time, and still today, it's just on a large piece of unplatted property, meaning it doesn't have a recorded plat. It's just kind of a remnant of farmland. When St. Alexius Clinic was built, they requested and the landowner granted a utility easement be placed on top of that. So there is water and sewer running in underneath that road, and that serves some of the development to the north of there. But it still remains outside city limits and still lacks dedicated right-of-way. It's just a set of easements.
If I may
Yes,
follow
go
up.
ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Lance, is it fair to say that will, with the utility easements and the utilities that are running under, that'll always be a road, and eventually that will become a paved road?
Most likely.
Most likely. Is there a benefit to us placing that in the CIP? Because I don't believe it's in there at all. Because of the additional traffic from the high school, when you look at an aerial map of that entire northwest area of Minot, that eventually bunch of high school kids are going to be driving their vehicles up and down that road to get to and from school. Is there a benefit of placing that in the CIP, do you think? How would that be handled? Would it become from a special assessment district? Obviously, it would have to be platted at some point. Just walk me through that, if you would.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, the way that this could be funded would either be through maybe a sales tax or a hub city funding or some sort of reserves. We wouldn't be able to special assess the improvements at this time because the benefit would go to an unplatted parcel outside city limits, which we can't do under Century Code, so that option's out. So you're left with using some sort of non-general fund cash to be able to fund a local road.
Okay. think that answers my questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions for Lance? Lisa?
Thank you. I'm going to open up that hornet's nest, but only for a second. I'm not going to talk about the merits of the Ann Street Bridge, that, what we're going to do. All I know is that you noted in your report that there isn't funding set aside for it because we would be seeking federal funding. And there is no federal funding at this point, correct?
That's correct.
And where would that responsibility fall if we're going to find federal funding? Will that be you and your staff? How does that occur? That's my only question related to the bridge.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor and Alderwoman Olson, we have been looking for federal funding. There's been several different grants that are out there right now, such as Safe Streets for All. There's build grants. There are a number of different grants that we have looked at. Some of the challenges that we have with the federal funds that are out there is they're really geared towards large-scale projects where you are impacting hundreds, if not thousands, of commuters or pedestrians a day. And at this point, to qualify for one of those grants, we just don't have the numbers to justify the improvements, right? So if they're going to look at, and they're all competitive, right? So if we're going to compare our project to somebody else's submitted grant project, we really don't have the data and I think the users to justify the expense. And so, in my opinion, these grants are going to be hard to come by because of some of those reasons. Also, a lot of them are tied into some of the census tracts where you're trying to hit a particular population, either like a low income or a disabled community or something like that. And they want higher thresholds generally than what we have or what we're seeing in Minot. Not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be a pretty tough climb for us to do.
So if I could continue, just one more question then. So leaving it in the CIP at this point as a placeholder isn't impacting you and your staff a lot? Am I correct in saying that? Or is it? I mean, I'm looking for that honest answer.
Honestly, right now, it's not. So we know it's there, we know it needs to be funded, so we continue the search for applicable grants. If we think that something may be applicable, then we'd bring it back to council and see if we want to move forward. The other thing that we have to kind of keep in mind is a timeline here, right? So this first couple rounds of federal grants that are out there, the timing is going to conflict with the construction of MI6, which is the downtown flood control phase, right? So a lot of times these grants will have a, must be obligated by, must be completed by when you spend their money. And we don't have the exact timeline nailed down yet on MI6. We know it's coming. It's going to depend on final design, railroad approvals, right-of-way acquisition from the railroad, and some of those other things that right now we don't have a clear picture on. I think once we know what our footprint is and we know what the span of the bridge has to be, because even that's in flux right now, then we'd have a better opportunity to take that data and then try to apply for a grant. Because right now, I might be applying for a 150-foot bridge, and then it has to be a 300-foot bridge, and our cost tables are out the window.
Okay, I appreciate that information. Thank you.
So there is a group of downtown people who are also working on funding opportunities as well, meeting with some historic bridge, folks and stuff. So it is being, sort of all levels. City staff is doing it. There's a group of, business and property owners downtown who are also diligently working on it. There's some folks in Bismarck with some state agencies who are also working on it. So it's on a lot of people's radar, and I think, that's good because hopefully no stone will be left unturned.
Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Lance, to double back on the funding sources for Sunset, you said sales tax, subsidy, things like that could be used. Could those same revenue streams be used to fund a portion of Ann Street Bridge if federal funding wasn't available for the entire project? And even safe routes to school. I drove by with all the snow melt. We all saw what happened with the ice damming that was going on over by Sammy's on Broadway and 4th Avenue. I did notice during the melt and the high water, the route under the bridge was completely inundated with water and obviously couldn't be traversed. So, I do believe that there's merit to this project. I do believe that it should remain in the CIP, and I think there's a strong case to even be moved up in the CIP, in my own opinion. But I'll let you answer the question then on sales tax, subsidy funding, safe routes to school. Could those same revenue streams on some way, shape, or form be used to fund this project?
In theory, yes. So those funding sources have less strings attached to them than federal funds. They're generally speaking a little bit more flexible for the council to use.
Okay. And just to follow up on that and to piggyback off of what Carrie said, even the parks. I mean, when we, just a couple meetings ago, we talked about the placemaking grant and trying to identify benefits of that parcel that the BNSF GOB will be vacating in that area, and that will be hopefully utilized in our community as a shining star in our community of a 13-acre parcel right smack dab in the middle of our community that can be utilized by citizens, be accessible to everyone, and hopefully we have a way to traverse the railroad track safely, because you drive by Ann Street Bridge, the existing one, and about 3 o'clock, 3:15, you'll see about a dozen or so kids throwing their bikes over the bridge closed sign. And my fear is that when that bridge does go away, even though it is closed, you're going to see them hopping the fence and walking right over the railroad tracks. And I'll tell you right now, that's what they're going to do, because they're not going to go under a flooded bridge, and they're not going to Broadway. They will take the path of least resistance, and they'll cut a hole in a fence or jump over a fence, and so in my mindset, give them a path. Give them a path to traverse that area. Hopefully the parks can come up with an idea for that area of Minot and make it an asset and not so much a liability. So again, I think that's a discussion that should be broached here rather quickly with all of the parties that are discussing this project. And hopefully there can be some sort of partnership moving forward. So thank you.
I think a plan would be a great idea. It just gives us more tools and ammunition when we would present a grant to a federal agency, right? That we thought through what this could look like and where things need to be, and we're not going to jeopardize the impact of the federal dollars by building a bridge and it doesn't go anywhere.
Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, and I agree with that completely. And I think you pointed it out perfectly, Lance, with the flood protection that'll be moving through downtown. I think those are conversations that should be hand in hand when we are building flood protection. We've talked about this in the past as well. That we're mindful that maybe someday there will be a walking path to get across there. There will be access to that area from downtown, and not only from downtown, but from a middle school to Northeast Minot for students that are obviously taking that route as it stands today, and in some cases, you could argue that there will be more traffic from students traversing that bridge. So just my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Paul. It is one of those, go ahead, Steve, go ahead. Yep, go ahead. I'll finish off.
This is a different
Different
spin.
Okay. Piggybacking on both Paul and Carrie, I think it was, when we had this discussion last year, I think my comments were, at least keep it on there to give the community an opportunity to look at this situation together, and maybe some partnerships will arise, and I see that happening. I've been to more than a few of those meetings over a cup of coffee with some very decent partners that are really working hard to find a solution to make it happen. And this isn't an investment that's gonna pay dividends tomorrow or the next day, or maybe not even next year, but generations to come, we're gonna see dividends pay off when we can pull this off. But by keeping it like we did last year, we gave an opportunity to the community to say, hey, if you want this, get together and let's find a solution to it. And we're at the ground, the starting point, and we've had some pretty decent discussions on it. Paul?
Just to piggyback off of that as well, Mr. Mayor, I just want to say, even on, this isn't the Ann Street Bridge as we know it today. This is not a bridge that goes from downtown to Northeast Minot over the river. This is to connect that parcel to plaza, a park, a green space that will be vacated by BN, and then there will be another bridge to traverse the river that is already existing. So again, this is just connecting our community. This is just connecting pedestrians. This is connecting people that want to go rollerblading, ride a bike, for families to go out and go for a walk. This is what we're doing. We're not reconstructing the Ann Street Bridge, and I think that's one thing that we need to make sure that we're clear on, that the citizens don't think we're reconstructing a bridge from downtown all the way over to Railway Avenue. That is not the goal. That's not the intent. That is not the plan. There is a pedestrian. The goal is to create a pedestrian walkway to traverse the tracks, the railroad tracks, to make it safe for our community and make it more welcoming. So that, just want to make sure that that's clear. We're not building the same wooden bridge again.
Steve?
Yeah, to follow up on that further, I had a meeting a couple months ago with two representatives of the Park Board, and they were very excited and very interested in having us maintain and work toward revitalizing, rebuilding a bridge into that area. They saw that as potentially being a crown jewel of our Riverwalk and park system, and I very much agree with them. There is new leadership in terms of the Park Board administration. Maybe that'll help and give it more energy. But they are interested. Now, whether they'll commit money is a whole nother question. But I think it'd be very important to try to work together to make that into a viable park and not just an old rail yard. I am concerned, like you are, Paul, with safety issues with kids. I don't want to put words in an opposing attorney's mouth, but it sure looks like an attractive nuisance to me. And it certainly looks like people would play chicken there too, in addition to just wanting to cross the tracks. But when I spoke with some individual representatives, again from Park Board, they were very interested in us keeping it, and hopefully there's some room for cooperation and moving together, because it really is something we should try to take full advantage of.
Thank you, Steve. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's refreshing to hear this topic talked about in kind of a realistic way, and I think Paul, kudos to you for sort of describing what this has turned into, because I think for a lot of people they are still back in the thought process that we're replacing the current wooden bridge, which I believe has to be gone for flood control. And the other question that leads me to, Lance, is that as I recall, the placeholder number that is in now was, and I think there were even 2 iterations of this, is in fact though based on the replacement, repair, upgrade, whatever you want to call it, of the existing bridge. So, I mean, the number, I guess I would just remind us all that the number that we're looking at may not be anything like the number that the new concept turns out to be. Is that true?
No, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Janser, the 5-point-something million that I had in the budget was looking at a shorter span bridge. You have to keep in mind that where this project really gets expensive is you're building in the ADA compliance on each side of the bridge, right? So you're building either, you can see a couple different designs, a corkscrew or a series of ramps that come up to that level. And to meet the railroad's height requirements, plus then the size of these beams to span that, I mean, you're going to be 7 feet in the air, something like that. So you have quite a ramp structure to build to get up to that level, and that's where a lot of the cost comes.
Paul?
I'm not an engineer, and I'm not going to tell anybody how to do their job. Lance, is the bridge access on the downtown side, is that considered to be ramps, or is that what would the plan would be, or would it be sit on top of a earthen levee? Because I know the flood protection would come through there. Would some of that cost of getting to that height be taken care of with like an earthen levee? Is that an option?
I think we, in the concept, if I remember right, Alderman Pittner, we spanned the levee And then we built like a switchback essentially on
Okay.
the south side of it.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry.
Oh, what,
Yeah, I had several things I wanted to
okay.
bring up. I didn't realize you were.
I didn't see your hand raised.
Where we
I'm
were
sorry.
going. Yeah, sure.
It's yours.
I guess 3 different areas to assess, to ask about and to kind of make public and to share my thoughts on. The first and the simplest is in terms of the sidewalks on 21st Avenue Northwest. You and I had a very positive discussion this afternoon, and I wanted you to share some aspects of that with the public and with the other members of the council. One of the things I was surprised and pleased to hear was I'm concerned about the safety. I mean, we need to get kids from soccer games, especially across that street, and we need to give them access to parked cars. And my concern was that if we divide this up into 2 projects, and we just do one half of it, it doesn't really direct people, give people access to where most of them park, or many of them park. But you had some positive developments in that area in terms of a potential crossing beacon? Crosswalk and a beacon?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, that's one of the improvements that we would envision at that crossing is some sort of we call them rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which is a really long term, but you push the button and it starts to strobe so that it alerts drivers that there's pedestrians that want to cross. So, we had to go through a series of engineering approvals as far as, the amount of pedestrians that would cross the street and stuff like that. But with the amount of people that cross that roadway at certain times, I would think that it'd be warranted to put that in.
And what was the other positive thing you mentioned in terms of getting this thing eventually constructed?
Well, I think the positive outcome is you're always trying to connect networks together, right? Whether it's a street network or a sidewalk network or a bike network. And so what the nice thing about this project is it connects to an existing network of sidewalks to the east of 9th Street, right? And then which then connects to a series of sidewalks that we built near Lewis and Clark Elementary. So over time, these sidewalk projects might seem random, but we'll start connecting these networks together, and you're linking parks and schools and public places, and now you have a pretty impressive network to get people around. So I think with this first phase, we accomplished a lot of that, and then in subsequent phases on 21st Avenue, you'll be able to connect to other parts of our network.
If I remember correctly, you also told me that there was some interest on the part of other governmental bodies in working together on this and maybe helping finance it.
That's correct.
That would be a very positive development, because before I thought we would just be on us. But if, for example, parks and schools are interested and see value in it and are willing to help pay for it, I think that would be a major factor and be worth delaying a little bit, particularly if we could get that crossing beacon there. So I feel much more comfortable after our discussion this afternoon and want to make everybody else aware of that. Now, moving on to 2 other things. One is I've also gotten lots of calls from people about 21st Avenue and with the new high school coming up there and the impact that'll have on traffic. Right now, it's also that kind of rural section, if I remember correctly, of roadway. We do have a fitness path going near it, but everybody's anticipating huge traffic problems. And during our discussion this afternoon, you reassured me in some ways, and I think it's important that the public hear some of the things you shared with me in terms of your feeling that it's not going to be as big of an issue as people are afraid at this point it might be.
Well, certainly, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, as part of any large project, we require a traffic study be conducted. So the school was no different. And I think some of the takeaways that came from that study were the left turn lanes that are there are pretty good. They might need to be lengthened a little bit. Just depends on how many people will be taking lefts off of 21st. We needed some lighting at the intersections just to make cars and pedestrians more visible during nighttime. But essentially, a large portion of that roadway is already a 3-lane roadway. There is a portion that's 2-lane, but it doesn't have very many access points on it yet. Back in the day when ING was there, they had a pretty large workforce that came and went from that building, and that was even before we had traffic signals at 16th Street and at the highway, and it worked. So initially, we're not too concerned with it, but like any project, you evaluate after something's built, and if we need to make adjustments and signal timing or other things, we can do that. You and I talked about the potential for reconstructing that roadway at some point in the future. A lot of that will depend on, generally they're funded with federal funds, right? So we have some large projects coming down the pipe. We have a portion of 16th Street that'll be reconstructed in '25, and that'll take the majority of our federal funds that are allocated to us. And then it takes a few years of, call it saving up your federal funds till you're ready for another project just because of their cost. So likely the next time we'd be in line for a project would be 28, 29, 30, something like that. And like we discussed on the phone, it's our thought that by the time we have enough dollars to do another project, probably the corridor that's going to need the most improvement is actually 4th Avenue and 3rd Avenue, kind of in the central part of the city, near where MI4, the Maple Diversion, will be built. That roadway it's struggling a little bit right now. It's showing its age, and there's a lot of material and improvements that are going to be carried over those roads to build that flood control phase, and there might not be much of a road left when it's all done. So we may have to program some improvements to rebuild that road.
That's very helpful. Also, I serve along with Carrie on the County Planning Commission, and I was involved in the steering committee for the new comprehensive plan. And one of the things those groups, particularly the Comp Plan Committee, are looking for is development of that northwest corridor along the bypass. So I think we're anticipating that within the next 20 years we'll see significant growth there, both in terms of population and commercial activity. So I think there will be a need at some point for significant improvements in that area. And I think 21st is the logical area to improve that stretch where it's only 2 lanes. On a more negative note, and I want to emphasize here, I'm not being in any way critical of you or of city staff, but I wanted to note my ongoing and increasing frustration actually with Sunset Boulevard. That's been a royal pain in the neck for people in the northwest part of Minot for years, and it'll be an even bigger pain in the neck of all of people in western and northern Minot, with the high school coming and more traffic and more growth anticipated. And I guess this strikes me, and again, I don't mean to be critical of city staff, but it strikes me as one of those things that we run into once in a while where there seems to be no solution. It's clearly a problem, but every time we talk about it, there's some new permutation, there's some new explanation or excuse. And it seems like we're stuck on this, and that's the thing I'm most concerned about. When I first brought this up, I was told that it's not in city limits, so we can't do anything. Then the story was that, we do need at some point, and we'll be at some point paving it, but we don't know what kind of pavement to put in because we don't know how much traffic it'll have, and we won't until high school gets going, for sure, and it makes sense to wait. We don't know if there's going to be a Walmart there. We don't know if there's going to be a residential neighborhood. We don't know what kind of street to build. Then the issue became of, well, we could build it, but who's going to pay for it? It's not in the city. We can't assess it to a property owner because we don't know who the property owner will be at some point. Somebody's going to probably buy that from the farmer or developer or investor who owns it. And, what are we going to do with that? Then the issue of the high school coming in. We don't know how big to make the improvement because we don't know how much traffic there's going to be with the high school. And today is something new. Today I hear that it's the century code that's part of the problem, that we can't special assess or assess somebody outside the city limits for an improvement. So it's this from my perspective, it's this never-ending saga of why we can't do it. And everybody that I've talked to, nobody has come to me and said, I love Sunset Boulevard the way it is. Everybody, dozens, scores of people over the years have said this is a royal pain. When you walk that neighborhood in the summertime, you can see all the dirt that's in the air. I mean, and we try to abate it with some fluids we spray on the road, but we're basically throwing that money away. But it's just really frustrating. It was so frustrating that after the latest conversation I had with a constituent, I put on my agenda to talk with you, Harold, and just kind of confront you and say, look, we got to do something. And it seems to be metamorphosizing or metastasizing the complexity of this. It's not even a mile-long street, and it causes problems for people, and it's going to cause more problems. And we seem to be powerless to do anything about it. It's like the marauding bands of turkeys. Nobody likes them. Everybody agrees it's a problem, but we can't seem to do anything. So I just
like them.
Well, if you have 31 in your yard at one moment and they cause enormous amounts of excrement, it's a problem. I like them occasionally too, wandering in. That's not an issue. But in my yard, we've had up to 31. A couple weeks ago, we had 21 at one time. Anyway, but I just wanted to bring that up, that, at some point, it strikes me as not being a Sunset Boulevard issue, but as being an exemplar of, I don't want to say dysfunction, but of powerlessness by the city. And again, maybe the solution is the county. I don't know if it's a county road. I don't know if it's a township road. I don't know who has responsibility for maintaining it. But somebody does, and it sounds like we share some of that. In the winter, it gets very nasty out there, and it becomes a one-lane road, kind of an ice palace in a sense almost. But I just needed to say this finally. It just becomes increasingly frustrating, and it'd be nice. I was going to ask Harold for a comprehensive kind of analysis of what the options are, if any. I mean, there certainly are some options. It's just a matter, I think, of finding out what they are and following through with them. And again, it probably needs to be part of a larger scheme, and we may need to wait on some of it before we do any design work or even any basic planning, because we don't know how many cars will use it. But my anticipation is with the high school being out there, we're going to have more and more traffic. And, not to be prejudiced or critical of young people, but we're going to see a lot of hot rodding. I think that's what's going to happen. And I did that too. When I was a kid, I drag raced once on a private driveway. I confess. I'm sorry, Chief. It was a stupid thing. It was a stupid thing. But I did it. And I think what we're going to see is with high school age kids who drive, we're going to see probably a higher frequency of risky behavior. And on gravel, that's the kiss of death. I mean, how often in rural areas do we see, especially around graduation time, 2 or 3 kids driving around, usually at night? Maybe they've been drinking, maybe not. They take a curve too fast, and they fly out of the vehicle, they crash, they fly out of the vehicle, and they die. And it's a tragedy for the entire community. So, I mean, I don't see that happening necessarily, but I think there is a significant risk of poor driver behavior. And I think a gravel road in the city, I know on the agenda of Liaison Committee, there was a top discussion of islands, unincorporated islands within city limits. And this is kind of at the edge of the city limits. It's not quite an island, but it's kind of a peninsula. So, maybe we need to talk about this with the county or the township or whoever. But I just needed to vent my frustration, and not just my frustration, but my frustration as a representative of people who live there and people who drive there, and more of those will be coming forward. So I just wanted to put that on the table and ask the city administration to take a look at what we can do about improving that section of our traffic network. So again, nothing personal, nothing against city staff, but just one of these things that is exceptionally irritating and appears like it should have a solution or a set of solutions. So I've spoken my piece, and I apologize for ranting and raving.
Nope, that's no rant or rave. But the image of you drag racing brings up images of Grease, the movie, so
You said drag racing in a driveway.
Yeah, in a private drive.
Paul? Is that like a half foot long?
Paul?
Mayor, I too hot rodded when I was younger as well. But Lance, is annexation an option for that parcel of land so that it can be within city limits, so that we can move forward on a project?
All right. So
If they don't want to.
I think the philosophical question that we all need to answer is, how much money are we willing to spend but then throw away? Right? Because we can pave it, but that road is not at any kind of design elevation that'll fit in with development. It won't support any sidewalk. It won't support any street lighting at this point, so we can pave it. But when a developer comes in and says, okay, I'm ready to develop land into something else, then we will tell him, okay, now you need to remove all this pavement that the city just spent a lot of money on, and you need to build something bigger and better. So the reason is that we have all of these constraints against it is because we don't have right-of-way. It's built on an easement. It's not annexed into the city. It's not on anyone's jurisdiction other than Public Works doing some courtesy maintenance on it just to keep it safe. So if you're looking at ways to be smart with taxpayer dollars, from that standpoint, it's probably not a good investment. And that's why staff has been encouraging council not to spend anything on this because we know for a fact it's throwaway money.
Paul?
Then my follow-up would be, would it be best to close that road and not use it as a path? So we're not spraying it, we're not blading it in the wintertime. We've made improvements into our bypass, we made improvements into 16th Street. Would it be better to close that segment of road so that individuals, again, just don't, it wouldn't be a risk for kids hot rodding around, it wouldn't be a risk for us having to blade it in the wintertime or things like that. Would that be an option?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, that's always an option. However, then we have to go back to the original reason why that was put in the first place. It was to save response times for emergency services. So we'd have to work with the fire chief and police chief to calculate what those times would be, to go back to essentially the old way of how they got around to those neighborhoods and see if that's within their acceptable timeframe. Now, we are building a new fire station on 4th Avenue, right? So maybe that
hit the bypass and-
time constraint is no longer valid.
Okay. Well, I'd like a follow-up on that, maybe from Fire Chief, on that, just to see what that, if that road is closed, when the new fire station comes online, if that might be a null and void if people are just hitting the bypass. And I'm guessing from 4th Avenue, and then they would just go around on the bypass. That's the route I would take versus traversing up 27th and then cutting over on Sunset. But yeah, if we could have a follow-up on that, maybe it would be an option, and then we're not nickel and diming ourselves maintaining a prairie trail.
Anything else for Lance?
I have two really quick questions.
Go ahead, Scott.
So I've been like collecting questions as all this great conversation has happened, so we're bouncing all over it, as I often do. When you were talking to Mark about the sewage ponds, you said that if there's a certain population level that we hit that may trigger some additional expenses there. What is that population level, roughly?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Burlingame, I want to say it was in the mid to upper 50,000s.
So we're not real far away then.
Not real far away, but some of that depends on the quality of your wastewater stream. I mean,
We've got high-quality wastewater in my...
yeah, we have the best stuff you can buy. But really, that kind of depends on what your treatment is as well, right?
Okay. Not to add on, but just like everybody else, I've heard about the Sunset Boulevard questions, and I appreciate the conversation tonight so that I can return a better question. I think that it doesn't appear there's an easy solution, but I think that it should be a community discussion. And if anybody out there wants to develop that land, that would sure help us out a whole lot. So, all right, I think that's all I have on those. So thank you.
Last call. Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Moving on to 9.2, that is the Sister City invitation and trip. We just, about a month ago, maybe a little over a month ago, the city of Cheyenne sent an invitation to the people or representatives that signed the Sister City Agreement for an official invite for, to be over there next month to help them celebrate Seton de Mai, which is their national, basically their 4th of July. The trip is out there, and I talked with Harold and Dave Lakefield, Finance Director. There is money in the travel budget for this trip. And it's an invitation. I don't know if anybody has any questions they'd like answered, but we're working on, through the chamber and the Huss Fest, we are working on an agenda to make sure we cover all the bases once we are there. So there'd be representatives from the chamber, MSU, Minot Public Schools, and the Huss Fest on that trip. So, any questions? Go ahead, Paul.
What's the weather like, going to be like? What do I need to pack?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I've never been there. Okay, moving on. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Mr. Mayor, I'm glad that they extended the invitation, and I'm glad that we are sending a contingency over there. I know sometimes there's some consternation in the money being spent to do this. It's not a vacation for anyone that's going. It's an opportunity to strengthen that bond with our sister city, and I think it just creates opportunities. So I'm glad that you told us about it, and I'm glad that we're sending people over to represent Minot.
You know, I think it sends a strong, it's a strong sign from our sister city that they actually want representatives from their sister city to take part in basically their 4th of July. And that's that's a big cultural display for them, and to actually reach out. I mean, among other things going on in the planning of this, they reached out to their sister city here and asked for the representation to come and take part in that celebration. So I think that's their commitment to keeping this alive, and I think it's also it's a sign to the ownership and management of the North Coast Fest that we want them to succeed as well. So, I will bring back a full report. Moving on to item 10, liaison reports, and let's kind of double up on this here. I would like each one to give your liaison report, but since this is our final meeting in City Hall, if you want to add at the end of your report any memories or comments as we make this our final meeting. Steve, let's start at your end.
Thank you. Just a brief liaison report. Before I do that, in fact, I should have said this earlier, because I wanted to express my appreciation to Battalion Chief Mason Maxwell and the 4 firefighters from Battalion C at Station 1 on March 9th, who spent 2 hours of their day, of their shift, giving me a very detailed tour of our new fire truck. They talked about the machine, they showed me the engine, they showed me the pumps, they showed me the equipment that goes with it. We had lengthy discussions about how they would use that apparatus, and I really wanted to express my appreciation. Now, why is that significant? Why did I ask for some time, and why did I ask so many questions, and may have been a pest in terms of the number of questions I asked? Because the piece of equipment we bought, or the next fire truck we'll be buying, we're looking at spending almost $800,000. That's one of the most expensive pieces of equipment that the city has. And I feel as an alderman I have some responsibility to be aware of what we're spending the money on. So, a major expenditure. The equipment to go on the fire truck for the next one will be about $70,000. So we're talking, something that's approaching $1 million. And that's a vital piece of equipment for the community and for the department. It's kind of like an operating room would be for a surgeon. If you don't have a good fire truck with equipment, you can't do much in the way of fighting fires. So it's a vital piece of equipment for the community, for the fire department, and a major expenditure. And I wanted to make sure that our money was being spent. They told me about the equipment, they told me about the process of ordering, which is very detailed, the time involved, some of the constraints we face. From when you decide you want a new fire truck till when you get it is usually 2 to 3 years now with supply chain issues. It's also important that citizens know that city staff are spending a lot of time and effort trying to find the best equipment for our needs, their needs, and trying to save money. We negotiated that contract to get a lower price on our next piece of equipment, which we'll be purchasing shortly. And I guess the new one for the new fire station will be coming within a week or two. We'll be getting it. So they're doing their best to save money. It's a lot of money. They're putting a lot of planning into it. That's something I've been impressed with as a psychologist, kind of the organizational functioning. So they've gotten us the best price. They swap out the old equipment and put it onto the new truck when it comes to save money there. They make numerous trips to the manufacturer. They talk constantly on the phone about specifications. One of the things they do is they learn from the previous one, and they try to adapt the design to what they've learned. One of the things I found out was that they changed the location of the rear view mirrors. On the driver's side, the rear view mirror is right next to the driver. On the passenger side, the rear view mirror is in front. And I noticed that, and I asked about that, and they said they found in their experience that the person sitting next to the driver interfered with the driver's vision, so they altered that. Found out that fire trucks basically are made to measure like a fancy suit or dress. You don't just go to the parking lot, kick the tires, and drive off with a fire truck. So the design, the staff time, the staff energy, the dedication of staff in coming up with a design that's usable and safe is really, really important. And I wanted to, again, compliment the officers and the leadership of the department in terms of the care in which they put into operating and purchasing this equipment. I was very, very impressed. So I apologize for, again, so many questions, but it's very important what they do, and I want to make sure, I need to make sure they have adequate equipment and spend our dollars in a sound fashion. So thanks again, Chief Maxwell and your crew. In terms of other liaison reports, at the Emergency Resource Council, we had a very nice briefing from Trinity about the move to the new hospital, and that was reflected much of the information in an article that Jill Schramm had in the Minot Daily on the start of moving day, which isn't quite set yet. They have a fleet of 14 ambulances that'll be transporting patients on a 15-minute schedule, and a 7-minute schedule for less impaired patients, less ill patients, and a 15 to 20-minute schedule for those who need a higher level of care. So it's a finely orchestrated operation, and again, reflects positively on the hospital. So we learned all about that and how that's going to be managed, and they've interacted very carefully and closely with our city emergency services personnel to make sure that the transit is safe and people stay healthy. So that was happening at the Emergency Resource Council. The 9/11 or 911 committee approved an expenditure of money on warning sirens for some of the nearby communities and making sure that they are upgraded to the standards of our new telecommunications system and radio system. Let's see, the big news in terms of the Commission on Aging was they had the annual I don't want to say drive along, but annual delivery along, where community leaders were asked to join volunteers in delivering meals to people who were getting Meals on Wheels. It was a delightful project and reaffirmed in my mind the importance of that program in terms of delivering nutritious hot meals designed by nutritionists and dietitians to a vulnerable population, and also the importance and value of maintaining social contacts with people who maybe don't get out very much. It was very heartwarming to see our elderly receive such good care, and the enjoyment they got from seeing someone who cared about them once a day. Really a neat thing I was able to participate in. I've done this for many years, and my heart still warms about the generosity of the volunteers and the caring they give. Let's see, I think Carrie will probably talk about what the County Planning Commission is doing, and I think that's about all I have to report in terms of my assignments.
Thank you. Lisa?
Did Stephen want to share memories of this room before we move on?
We'll circle back. He has to think about it.
Yes, I guess I should. There were three memories I have predominantly. I don't know, having been worked up about the Sunset Boulevard, I'm not sure if I can maintain my composure, but I think that's kind of primed me to be emotional, and I apologize for that. The first memory I have is of all the steps we've taken in this room, particularly with our colleagues at the state level in terms of the legislature and governor's office, and also our congressional delegation, in trying to assure flood protection and water supply for the city of Minot. That's a generation-long project. It's costing $1 billion, but we're finally seeing some progress there. That's the most important thing, I think. Whenever I kind of wonder what's going on, whenever I feel frustrated or have a sense of aimlessness, I often will go back to Elwood Robinson's classic History of North Dakota, which is about this thick. And he's identified as a historian 5 or 6 trends that he feels have described the growth of our state for ever since we've been a state and even beforehand. And one of the key things he sees in our state is the issue of water, either too much of it or too little of it. And he sees that as one of the major challenges we've always had. And I think we're finally making some progress in assuring an adequate water supply with NAWS. And we're also doing things to make sure that water doesn't inundate us. So I think Robinson is right on. That's one of the key issues we've struggled with forever and probably will struggle with forever. And I think it's wonderful to see finally some progress on that front. I think as the climate continues to change, as the world warms up, safe, potable water will become an increasingly scarce commodity. And it'll be something that we need to safeguard and make sure that our community has, regardless of what other people may do about their water supply. We will have, I think, a much more robust, much more resilient supply of water when we tap the Missouri River. We also need to protect our city from flooding. We can't have every year this threat. So I think that's been the biggest accomplishment that I've seen in this chamber. The second thing that I think back on is our repeated efforts to save the base, and I think Task Force 21, especially people like Mark, deserve a great deal of credit for that. The Minot Air Force Base is a vital part of our country's defense, and it plays a very important role in our community and our region. And we've worked very hard as a council, and in the other groups we've deputized in a sense to act on our behalf, particularly Task Force 21, to keep the base here, to do everything we can to lobby at the federal level and to support the people who serve here. So I think our efforts to keep the base here, to improve the quality of life for the people in the military and their families is a really important thing, and something I'm very proud of that we've done. And the third thing is some years ago we passed a smoke-free family dining ordinance which prohibited smoking in restaurants. It was part of the statewide and nationwide and citywide move to try to improve the air quality in indoor establishments. If Carrie thinks that people were hostile recently when we talked about flags and things like that, I'm not sure that really, well, it certainly was equaled by what was happening back then. We had hundreds of people here assembled. We had people screaming at us. We had threats. Several people told me they would never vote for me because of my position on that issue, and I lost the re-election, in fact, because of that issue, I think, largely because of that issue, not exclusively because of that issue. So it cost me personally, but I think it's something I had to do, and I don't regret it in the least bit, because I was able to take a step toward making a safer community. And now the idea of smoking in a public place seems so strange and foreign. Back then it wasn't, and it took a great deal of effort and some courage to try to get this thing changed so we could protect people in public establishments. We saved lives because of that, and I'm proud of that. So very stressful, very unpleasant time, but I think it's something that had to be done. And I think, again, sometimes we need to step back and look at what our role here is in these chambers. And one of them, I think, is to preserve life and property as much as we can. And I think we did that when we passed that ordinance. And now it's a done deal. It's taken for granted that you'll have clean, safe air wherever you are. So those are the three biggest memories I have for these chambers. And I think the thing that makes me emotional is just this sense of gratitude to be able in this room to serve the citizens of Minot, to have our Republican form of government where people's rights generally are respected, and where we hope everyone will be able to be treated fairly, and where people can enjoy their freedoms. It starts here. It ends in Washington and the Capitol building, but it starts here. And if we don't have that kind of respect, if we don't have an effective government where people can feel part of the process and be respected, I don't think there's much point to it. So in our little fashion here, we, I think, contribute to this bigger enterprise that's the United States. So I'm very proud that we're able to have that privilege. So those are my memories.
Thank you, Steve. Lisa?
As far as Liaison Committee, I, in the last month, have met with the Service Basin Planning Council Loan Review Committee, along with what Alderman Padragula was referencing. I had the joy of helping deliver Meals on Wheels, and due to work constraints in the past and then COVID and such, I'd never had the opportunity, even though I've been serving this many years. It was my first time, and I really did enjoy that day, and I just have to agree with what he said. It was so fun to walk to the door, see someone waiting, see a smile. They didn't know me, but they were waiting for that person delivering that meal, and what a great service that is. So I'm glad that I had that opportunity. Attended one of Alderman Burlingame's Child Care Committee meetings. We have another one coming up this week, and I think the conversation there has been good. And then we did have the Liaison Committee, which would be City, County, Park, and School District. However, only city and county representatives were in attendance that day, along with many staff members. But we did discuss an opioid settlement options. Some of these have been brought to the forefront through some actions taken by our legislature, and so talked about how we would best move forward, and I think Harold and staff will bring some options to us. We did continue our conversation about the nuisance property. Didn't land on a decision because we just had a lot more questions and answers, so I think that will stay on the agenda. And then this was following our 2-day retreat, and so I had the opportunity to be the first one to say that we will be offering some invitations to our local elected officials so that we can meet together and collaborate. And so the 2 county commissioners that were there were the first to hear that. As far as my memories, I did take just a moment to write them down, so I think I'll read them instead. I have a couple. June 18th of 2010 was the night that I was sworn in as a city council member. I was nervous and excited all at the same time. I was the 6th woman in Minot's history to be elected, and there had been a 12-year time span since the last woman had served. I believed at that time that I had a responsibility to represent women in Minot. I felt that way then, and I still feel that way now. Issues that involve women and children are near and dear to my heart. And though I can't find a specific date to recall for the second memory, I'd lump a series of dozens of meetings into one category called the 2011 flood. In the first few days of the flood, if I was not at the Emergency Operations Center, I was here receiving updates on the flood fight. And following the recession of the waters, we had dozens and dozens of meetings dealing with the aftermath and long-term recovery. During that time, this room truly served as the people's house. There were a lot of raw emotions, a lot of hurt, a lot of opinions, and ultimately a lot of plans that we are still dealing with today. I would say if there's anyone that is interested in elected office, they should have to experience a natural disaster. We had the opportunity to see the best and the worst of our community, our residents, our state, and ourselves. And much as Alderman Padragula said, I am very grateful for the memories that have been created in this room, and I look forward to continuing that work in our new City Hall.
Thank you, Lisa. Carrie.
Liaison report, Library Committee. The Library Board has elevated Zaina Moya, who is a library employee, to be the interim director while the search for a replacement for, a permanent replacement for Janet Anderson takes place. So that started this week, I guess. And Janet has graciously agreed to stay on as a consultant in this transition time in a limited capacity, helping Zaina and the board transition to new leadership. So we are looking forward to that and to having interviews with applicants. The second thing is Scott and me and Mark served with 2 city staff on the Housing Needs and Market Analysis Selection Committee. There was an RFP put out to firms to do some housing needs and market analysis for us, and so we narrowed it down to some finalists that we will be interviewing next week, right? Next week? Yep. And hopefully one of them will fit the needs of what we want and need for the study. So, yay.
Anything on the memories?
Oh yeah, I have so many. No, I sit here and I think of the generations of people who've sat up here and their passion and love of this community. And it does take a special kind of person to just sit up here and do this work. And I carry their passion and visions and dedication, with me as I sit up here, and will honor them by carrying that same passion to the new City Hall. So for all of those, the men and women who have sat up here and served our city, it just, when you think about all the things that have happened in the decades in this room, it is quite remarkable. And it has built an incredible city that we're all proud to live in and serve. The second one was, one of the reasons I ran for office was I wanted to repeal the discriminatory breed-specific law, and to be able to do that in this building and to have a more efficient dangerous animals law really meant a lot to me and to the animals, and to be able to see people now have their formerly prohibited breeds be outside and enjoying the spring along with the rest of us has been quite a beautiful sight. Thirdly, I mean, this room I think will always be remembered for me as, September of 2020, and when we were faced with opposition about Mayor Sitma's decision to fly my community's flag, the Pride flag, and that night really, when I moved back to Minot in 2017, I really struggled for years about what the heck I was doing back here. I didn't know. One of my pastor friends who died of COVID 2 years ago said, you'll figure it out. You'll have the epiphany of why you're supposed to be there again. And that night when I had to stand up for my community and our right to exist in this community and to claim Minot as our home as well, that was the epiphany. I realized at that moment why I was back and why I needed to stay here. And that was a very affirming moment for me. And I'll always remember that happening in this room. That's it.
Paul. Liaison reports. Visit Minot TRF committee working towards crafting that committee, that Tourism Recovery and Resiliency Commission in perpetuity, and how that looks moving forward. I was not able to attend the retreat with the rest of my colleagues. I apologize for that. I had a prior engagement. As far as memories, I think of, we've got a picture on a shelf in our house, and it's of me and my wife and our 2 children at the time, standing out there the night that I was sworn in for my first term. And it's a picture that will always be a part of our lives. It'll always be, it was a monumental night, and kids will ask, where were we at? Why was that picture taken? And it'll be fun to tell that story. We drive down 6th Street, and my kids say, Dad, that's where you have meetings. Dang it, Steve. Getting everybody emotional. I think of I'm not getting emotional for the reasons that other people, but I think of driving around town with my dad, who's from Minot, was born and raised here. And he would tell us stories, He grew up north of Minot on a farm, and he says, I remember when Minot State was the edge of town. I remember when Minot State was built. I'm going to be able to tell my kids, I remember when grandma would take us to pay the water bill. And we'd walk over to the police station and get baseball cards or football cards. That was our enjoyment. Or we'd close the car wash with my dad, and we would drive over to police station and say, Dad, we could get some baseball cards, we could get some football cards. Yeah, that was our treat. So to be able to have that role with my kids and to tell them that I had a place in this building, I had a placard with my name on it, like my dad did with me. And that hits a little near and dear to my heart right now. So sorry for getting emotional, but I don't know. I'll point of privilege here. It was my dad's birthday on April 15th. He turned 71, so I just want to say happy birthday to my dad. And I love you, and stay strong, and see you when you get home.
Thank you, Paul. Mark?
In 1977, when I moved to Minot, I was working for Central Office Supply, which was a little office equipment and supplies place on South Broadway, above the top floor of the Signal Realty Building. And one of the things that they did was we bought that business and found that they, at the time, were the supplier of these name placards that slide in up here. And the previous owner that we bought out, who stayed around for a little while and kind of helped out transition, gave me the clear impression of how important City Hall was and how you made darn sure that whatever they wanted got taken care of. And I kind of always carried that with me, even as I got more involved in the community and got to know people who maybe were aldermen or the mayor. So it's not lost on me that, you know, I have one of those little named things that slides in up here. It's a privilege to serve the citizens of this community, and I'm happy to do it. There have been a lot of good meetings and a lot of good work done in this chambers, whether it's budgets or deciding what bid to take or who to hire. A lot of improvements have been decided upon in this building. You know, big things like the new airport and smaller things like using funds through community development to recover from some flood damage in some of our recreational areas. But I think the key memory to me that stands out as the strongest and the one that is most significant to me is the decision when we passed the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Plan, and after all of the trauma, you know, those meetings in the auditorium, all of the time in the you know, Emergency Operations Center, that we were finally deciding that we were on a path to recovery and to resilience, to resurgence, and that Minot was committing to the being responsible for the local share of that project. And to me, that was the most significant vote that I've made in the time that I've been here. Thanks.
Scott?
Your liaison report?
One little liaison report thing. The ad hoc committee on compensation and benefits has made its recommendations, and that report is being put together, finalized, and will be presented to the council next month.
Okay, Scott.
All right, quick liaison report. Our child care committee, as Lisa mentioned, has met. We had our first meeting, which was just kind of a get to know you, talk about the roles and responsibilities and all that kind of stuff. Our second meeting, we had child care licensing come in and give us a whole bunch of information on to kind of help us build a basis around that. Our next meeting is on the 20th, so Thursday at 1:30. It'll be at the library, as this room will not be available. The topic of that meeting will be childcare and the effects on Minot Air Force Base. So we're looking forward to a vibrant conversation, and somebody that's had the opportunity to talk to a few airmen about this and families about this. I think it's going to be very interesting. So that's my thing that hasn't been talked about so far tonight. Regarding memories, as the newest member up here, as I was even walking in here tonight, and pretty much every time I walk in here, I think back to the first time I ever came to a city council meeting. And I came in because at that time, the decisions were being made, and I wish I could tell you all the details, but my memory isn't that well. It was around the building of what would become Washington Townhomes in Minot, which is affordable housing, kind of over, sort of in the area of, oh shucks, now I'm drawing a blank on sorry, I pulled it up here so I could, Washington Elementary School sort of behind there. And the room was packed that night, and there was a large amount of people that came out that were very passionate about it. And oftentimes is the case with this, the heckler's veto is quite loud, and people were talking. And I remember feeling so defeated as I listened to the conversation that night, because not only have I spent my career working with people who live in low-income housing, but I spent a large portion of my life living in low-income housing. And listening to the way that the community was at that time talking was extraordinarily disruptive and hurtful as I listened to that. And then I saw the courage of our council, who voted unanimously to approve that, who stood up to that and said, you know, people of all income brackets are welcome in this community. And people of all, you know, that a good, solid community includes good quality, low-income housing. And flash forwarding to today, not only am I able to sit up here, I'm also on one of my side gigs. I'm the president of one of the developers of that housing, and we're developing housing elsewhere in North Dakota. So it's just an amazing thing of how life can happen. I never would have imagined in a million years that night as I was sitting there that I would ever be sitting here. And all the memories of standing here as an advocate many times, testifying, reaching out to you guys well before I got on here, and working with so many aldermen throughout time who I've always respected, and now being given that opportunity to serve the people of Minot is the honor of my life, and I'm so proud of the opportunity, and I can't wait to, as we say goodbye to this building and all the memories, to welcome in the new City Hall. So, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I guess my liaison report is kind of short. I know we had a Task Force 21 meeting. I know members of Task Force were out on Minot Air Force Base for that big show of force. What was it, Mark? 12?
Global Thunder.
Global Thunder. How many B-52s took off?
10 jets took off in a little under 14 minutes.
10 jets, 10 B-52s, and wow, amazing. So we continue to, Task Force and the Chamber Board of Directors, we continue to do the work there. And we did have that, the Chamber annual meeting also. But, you know, memories for me, I mean, I get the benefit of listening to everybody else's memories, and I can kind of tap, and I'm taking notes, and I'm going, oh yeah, say that, mention that. But, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, you know, having my mom and my family here when I got sworn in. So that was pretty cool. But, you know, I find myself kind of pinching myself from time to time, because I'm just, you know, I'm just a kid who grew up 5 blocks south of here. And when I grew up, Park Street was gravel, you know, and they paved it. And Park Street didn't have that series of apartments. So, you know, to be in the likes of names like Chuck Duke, Kurt Zimbelman, Bob Wetzler, Neil Lee, Chester Wrighton, Ed Kuhn, Dean Franzfog, Dean Somerville, Tom Lee, Rick Hedberg, Chuck Barney, Bob Schemp, David Wayne. You know, these are, and there's so many that I forgot. I benefited from the fact that in a past life, I was a photographer and reporter. And I attended, either as a photographer or a reporter, I attended city council meetings. Sat right there and watched it. I got to watch it. I got to watch the 14 members interact and the attitudes and the little temper tantrums that we joked about back in the newsroom. But I also, and I think back that those decisions made in the past, that happened here. History of Minot happened right here. To me, and I find myself pinching myself so many times, saying I get to be a part of that. And you know, the names of the past bring me to where we are today. With people are going to talk about us that way, that we helped shape the future of Minot. You know, there was a time that home of economy was the edge of town. There was a time that Our Lady of Grace in Southwest Minot, that was the edge of town. If you wanted to get to KMOT, it was a gravel road, one gravel road. 16th Street going up the hill was not there. I remember decisions like that. I remember we used to shoot our fireworks off while they were building Magic City campus because my dad worked for Matson's and that was out of town. It was a safe place to shoot off fireworks. So the decisions made in the past have really grown this city, and it's really remarkable. And I'm just so very proud to be a part of it. And I sit here and I reflect on the actual decision-making process that I took to say, you know, Tom, it's time to run for council. You know, Tom, it's time to throw your hat in the ring to be mayor of a city that I was born and raised in. God, that's great. It's just a wonderful feeling that we are all doing the people's work and we get to give something back. And it's just, I'm very proud to be a part of this council, and I do honestly feel like I'm a part of it. I'm not above anybody on this council. So I appreciate each and every one of you and the work you've done for the people. And I can't wait till we turn the lights on and the new chapter and the new future for the Magic City. And I couldn't have picked 6 more people that I would rather do that with than the 6 that are up here with me today. So those are my memories, and I appreciate, man, great stuff, and great stuff that's on the record. So I really appreciate it. At this time, before we adjourn, though, I do want to bring Chief Klug up to give us an update on the 911 system. We had a little bit of a hiccup today with it. So Chief Klug, the mic is yours.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just want to bring an update. Once again today, we experienced an outage in our 911 system. The outage was only for Verizon customers. If they called, they'd get a fast, busy signal, and it wouldn't go through. So through this, we were notified at 11:36 this morning that this was taking place. And what we've learned since then is there was a fiber cut near Tower City that was on a railroad I can't even say that. Good thing I don't have to say it 3 times fast. Railroad right-of-way, underwater. So there is a crew on site working on repairing the fiber. Like all the other times, at the exact same time, there was a hardware shortage or hardware outage at another location, so that eliminated the backup plan that is in place. So Verizon, as of 6/25, we got emailed that they have a temporary fix in place. When people call 911 now, it rings through, but it goes to our admin lines, so at least we can answer those lines and get people help as needed. So I don't have any details on exactly how all this took place, but like in the past, these problems are starting to reach the governor's office, and I would anticipate that there'll be some investigation into exactly what took place.
Any questions, John? Paul?
How excited are you for us to get out of here so you guys can expand a little bit and get a little elbow room?
Alderman Pittner, I don't know how much quickly expansion-wise we are going to do anything, but
At least we'll be out of your hair.
we'll gladly accept what is left behind.
Yeah, at least we'll be out of your hair, right?
Yep.
Thank you, Chief. Before we adjourn, just I would like to grab a group picture of the council in front of the dais before we all take off. From what I understand, the nameplates are not going to the new council, so be sure to grab those as a memento of the history you have made and the history you're about to make. So, okay.
Can I keep them until we for sure?
No, get them here. I'm just kidding.
Michaela's gonna keep them and give
We'll
them to
keep
us
them.
when it's a go.
Don't take them yet.
Don't take them.
We'll have new ones. Anna's already working on ordering new updated placards at the new city hall that look a little bit more modern than what we have here today.
Thank you, Harold. So with that, we are on to adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Mark. Is there a second?
No, it's
No.
moved by Paul, it has to
Oh,
be Paul.
moved by Paul.
So
Is there a
moved.
second?
I'll second it.
Steve seconds it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned for the final time.